I'm a 28-year-old woman and I've been no contact with my mother for nearly a decade. Until I got a voicemail last month that changed everything. It came from her neighbor, someone I didn't even know existed, telling me my mother had suffered a stroke and there was no one else. At first I didn't even recognize the voice. I played the message twice, then deleted it. 2 days later, I was sitting in the hospital room looking down at the woman who spent years making sure I knew I wasn't wanted. I was born after she had a miscarriage. Something traumatic. I don't deny that. But instead of therapy or healing, she treated me like the living reminder of everything she lost. She once told me when I was 5 that I ruined her life. I remember it clearly. I had spilled juice on the carpet. She didn't just yell. She looked me straight in the eyes and said her marriage wouldn't have fallen apart if I hadn't been born. When I was 8, my father left. He packed his things in the middle of the night and never came back. When people asked, my mother said it was because he couldn't handle raising a difficult child. I didn't ask questions, I already knew it was somehow my fault. That same year, I was diagnosed with chronic asthma. My mother would groan every time I needed to go to the emergency room. She even said once, while driving me to urgent care during an asthma attack, that she should have just left me in the hospital nursery. There was a school trip to a museum. When I was 11, I needed a refill on my inhaler. That same week, she chose not to buy it, told me to learn to control it. I stayed home. I stopped asking for things after that. Every time the utility bills came in, she'd hold them up in the kitchen like they were awards and say, "You cost more than you'll ever be worth." Birthdays. I didn't have them. I mean, I had the date, but not the celebration. If someone gave me a gift, a neighbor, a teacher, she either returned it or claimed it for herself. There was a doll I got once that I found in her room weeks later. Untouched, but out of my reach. She got remarried when I was 14 to a man who pretended I didn't exist. He never said hello, never looked me in the eye. When I was walking past him in the hallway, I heard him mutter that I was just her past life's residue. I didn't understand what that meant then, but I do now. I was the price of her regret. That's all I'd ever been. When I got accepted into the local community college, I printed out the letter and stuck it on the fridge. That night I found it in the trash. She laughed and told me I was wasting everyone's time, said I'd drop out within a year and come crawling back. I didn't. I worked 2 jobs through high school, one at a fast food chain and the other walking dogs in the neighborhood. I saved every cent. And when I turned 19, I packed up and left. No announcement, no goodbye, just a note that read, "Don't wait up." For the next 5 years, I couch surfed with classmates, rented the cheapest rooms I could find, and slowly clawed my way into stability. I graduated with a nursing degree, passed my board exams, and got licensed. I didn't tell anyone from my old life. I changed my number, my address, everything. My name stayed the same, but it felt new because no one was using it to hurt me anymore. And then came the voicemail. I didn't go immediately. I waited a day, then another. I told myself I just wanted to see what she looked like. Now I don't know what I expected. Maybe weakness, maybe fear. What I didn't expect was that same look she always gave me. Even now, with half her face paralyzed and her body limp from the stroke. The same smirk, the same of superiority, like time hadn't moved forward at all. She looked at me and said, with effort, "I always knew you'd come crawling back." She sounded smug, like the last 10 years had just been a phase I was destined to outgrow. I stood there for a second, then smiled back and told her not quite because I hadn't come back to be her daughter. I had come back to be something else entirely. She was broke. Her second husband had left her 2 years ago. No savings, no family who to answer her calls. Just me. The daughter she raised to feel like a debt, and now the only one holding the pen on what came next. I signed the hospital forms, arranged for her discharge, got a lawyer involved. Not because I wanted to help, but because I wanted control. She had made me feel like a mistake for so long. Now, for the first time, I got to choose what she felt. This wasn't forgiveness. This was something colder, sharper, something that felt a lot like justice. I didn't bring her home because I forgave her. I brought her home because no one else would. The hospital gave me to take her in or sign her over to state care. I told them I'd do it, but only on my terms. A lawyer met us in the hospital room the next morning. She could barely hold the pen, but she managed to scribble her name on the power of attorney. Documents, medical, financial, everything came under my control. She didn't even read them. She just stared straight ahead while the lawyer explained each section, nodding occasionally. At home, I wheeled her inside and parked her in the living room. The TV was already on. She tried to ask how to change the channel, but I made her wait until the show was over. It was a drama series she'd once called trashy when I was a teenager. Now it played every afternoon and she had to sit through it, eyes glued to the screen, no remote in reach. Her room was already ready. Pastel pink walls, frilly curtains, throw pillows with glitter unicorns. I even swapped out the ceiling light with one that projected stars and rainbow colors. The sheets were cartoon-themed. She used to say pink was for a week. Now her world was dipped in it. She looked around and didn't say a word. I closed the door behind her without asking if she liked it. Meals were simple soup, mashed vegetables. I served them in plastic bowls with cartoon characters printed on the sides. Every time I placed the tray in front of her, I reminded her that the burden she once sighed about now made her food. She didn't look up. Her shampoo ran out on day 3. I replaced it with a baby formula brand labeled mild for delicate hair. I didn't even try to hide it. I set it right beside her sink, next to a pink toothbrush shaped like a dolphin. She stared at it like it might bite her. She once wrote pages about me in a diary I found in a sealed box in her closet. I read one entry a night while she sat in bed. I didn't change a word. I read how she felt cursed the day I was born, how she used to cry in the shower after school meetings because she was trapped with a child she didn't ask for. Her expression stayed blank the first few nights. Esther. On the 5th night, she told me to stop. I didn't. I made her a daily schedule. Wake up at 7:00 a.m., bed made by 7:30, breakfast at 8 o'clock, morning pills at 8:15, bathroom break at 8:30, and so on. She wasn't capable of doing all those things alone. So I reminded her of every task like I was her supervisor. I pinned the schedule to the wall above her bed. It had a sticker chart, smiley faces for good behavior, frowns. When she snapped at me, she called me a monster. On the 7th day, I nodded and said, I learned from the best. Then I played my graduation speech on loop from my phone, the one she never came to. I'd recorded it years ago when my friend's father held up her phone in the front row for me every morning it played while she ate breakfast. Neighbors started to ask questions. They saw me walking her in the garden or wheeling her down the driveway. I always smiled and said, she's lucky her daughter forgave her. They smiled back, not knowing a thing. I made sure every nurse visit was scheduled when I was home. I listened closely. I watched her expression when her past was mentioned. She tried to speak carefully, but I controlled the conversations. No lies allowed. One morning, she asked if she'd walk again. I said she could if she admitted she was wrong. If she admitted I was never a burden, you know. She looked away. I didn't push. I just wheeled her to her spot by the window facing the blank wall and left her there for the rest of the evening. I installed child locks on her wheelchair brakes, told her it was for safety. She didn't question it, just sat there in silence. She used to control every inch of my life. My outfits, my food, my friends. Now she couldn't move an inch without my help. At night, I'd sometimes hear her crying softly. I didn't ask why. Instead, I printed out my old report cards, the ones she used to tear up. I pinned them on the fridge. I placed my nursing license beside her bed in a clear frame. When she asked for something, anything, I made her ask properly. Full sentence, please and thank you. She once refused and waited 6 hours for me to hand her the television remote. After that, she never skipped the words again. By the end of week 2, she stopped trying to protest. She followed the schedule, ate what I gave, watched what I watched, sat where I placed her. She stopped asking when she could leave. She had no one else. No friends, no visits. Just me. And I wasn't her daughter. I was the cost, the receipt, the living proof that debts don't always go unpaid. The first change I made was the mirror, a full-length one placed directly across from her bed. It wasn't subtle. Every morning when she opened her eyes, the first thing she saw was her reflection, her frail, hollow frame, her immobile arm, her tired eyes. She had no choice but to look at what time, choices, and bitterness had done. I didn't say anything about it. I just positioned her bed slightly to the left so it lined up perfectly above her headboard. I framed the full hospital bill from her stroke recovery, itemized, paid in full with my name on the receipt. I used a silver frame, polished clean. Every nurse who came in saw it. She tried to cover it with a towel. Once, I removed the towel without a word and taped the corners down. At noon each day I wheeled her out into the front garden. There was a park across the street. Children played there every day after school. Swings creaked, laughter carried. She watched them through the iron bars. I sat beside her and told her how I used to dream of playing like that, but never got to. Not once. I made sure to point out the kids running toward their parents with ice cream, their shoes muddy, faces messy. She never said anything. She just watched. I stopped hiding the painkillers after that first week. I kept them in a see-through container on the kitchen shelf when she needed them. She had to ask. Not just ask politely. I waited for her to use the right tone, full sentence, and say thank you. If she skipped any part, I walked away. She got the hang of it. By day 4, for breakfast, I added a new tradition. I dug up old video files from a thumb drive I hadn't touched in years. They were recordings of childhood birthdays, except mine were just clips of empty rooms, kids celebrating without me, or a silent screen where the recorder had forgotten to press play. One showed me sitting alone with a cupcake while voices laughed in the background. Every morning she watched one while she ate toast and soft fruit. Under her bed, I hid a small Bluetooth speaker. At random intervals it played soft lullabies, the kind she used to scoff at, calling them pathetic and childish. She once called me weak for singing one to myself after a nightmare. Now they played low and steady, especially at night, just loud enough to keep her awake. Her favorite blanket disappeared one afternoon. I replaced it with a coarse, scratchy one, the same kind I had as a kid when she told me only good kids got comfort. I watched her try to smooth it out, try to find a corner that didn't itch. She gave up eventually and folded it at the foot of the bed. When I was 15, she slapped me across the face for crying after failing a test. Now I walked past her chair, stopped suddenly, and let tears roll down my cheeks. On cue, I practiced until it looked real. She would shift, fidget, murmur for me to stop. One night she said, "Enough." And I turned away, still crying. I invited over an old childhood friend, someone whose mother once told mine she wished she could adopt me. We sat in the kitchen while my mother sat nearby, listening. We talked about the good memories that never happened, what life might have looked like if things were different. Her mother had offered me a place once. My mother said no. My friend remembered everything. At the end of every day, I left a printed hourly log on her bedside table, a list of every task. I did medication at 9:00, changed sheets at 10:30, fed lunch at noon, and so on. It was signed off by me with a note, "Unpaid labor are provided by the one you didn't want." She once asked for a priest to visit. I agreed and brought in a therapist instead. The therapist introduced herself calmly and asked about my mother's childhood. At first, the house was silent in a way that felt intentional, like it had been holding its breath waiting for me to come back, and now it was exhaling slowly, drawing me in. I'd wake up before dawn, not because I had to, but because there was something about the early light touching the edges of the room where she slept that made me feel like I was in control. She didn't speak much that first week, mostly just stared, occasionally mumbled, never said thank you unless prompted. But then the dreams began. Not nightmares, those I could handle. These were more insidious, softer, like memory had wrapped itself in warm tones just to make me forget how sharp it used to be. I'd wake up sweating after seeing my 7-year-old self sitting on the cold tile floor with a nosebleed while my mother yelled at someone on the phone about not being able to go on vacation. The first time it happened, I almost walked into her room just to stare, to see if she looked different, weaker, remorseful, anything. But she didn't. She was asleep, mouth slightly open, one hand twitching under the baby pink blanket I'd forced her to use. That was when I found the tapes. I was looking for extra towels in the hallway closet and stumbled on a taped-up box with her handwriting on it. "Do not discard. Personal." My breath caught in my chest, something primal telling me not to open it, but I did anyway. Inside were cassette tapes, old, labeled with dates and strange abbreviations. I found my old Walkman in the attic, dusted it off, and played one. Static at first, then her voice, not talking to me, but crying. She was younger, maybe still married. "I didn't ask for this," she said between sobs. "She's not what I wanted. I wanted the other one." My fingers tightened around the Walkman. She was talking about me. Or rather, the one before me, the miscarriage. I listened to all 7 tapes that night. Some were arguments with my father, others were recordings of herself crying, praying, begging. And always the same conclusion: I wasn't enough. I was never going to be. The next morning, I placed one of the tapes on her bedside table without saying anything. She didn't ask about it, but I saw her eyes linger. Later that day, she knocked the tape off the table by accident. I didn't pick it up. That night, she asked why I had left it there. I didn't answer. Instead, I read another entry from her diary, one about how she had considered sending me to live with her sister once but decided it was better to keep me so no one thought she was weak. My voice didn't shake when I read it, but hers did when she said, "I was scared." That was new. She'd never admitted fear before. But it didn't matter. Not yet. I ramped things up. Her room became even more infantilized. I bought her a glow-in-the-dark night light that played lullabies and programmed it to turn on at random intervals. She started flinching when it played. I told her it was a scheduling error. It wasn't. I removed her chair cushion for a day and replaced it with a hard wooden seat. When she asked, I said it was in the wash. It wasn't. During meals, I would sometimes eat next to her and talk to no one, just narrate things I remembered. The time she missed my school play. The time I fainted in gym class and she didn't answer the phone. The time she threw my sketchbook in the trash because it had demonic drawings, they were trees. I recited these events like grocery lists. No anger. Just facts. She began avoiding my eyes. That was when the neighbors started leaving letters. Slipped under the door, unsigned, all in the same tidy script. "This is not healing," one said. "Revenge doesn't make space for peace." I burned that one in the sink. Another letter referenced something personal, my father's name. I hadn't said it aloud in years. That letter, I kept. I hid it in a book I'd hollowed out in high school for hiding snacks. Now it held words. I didn't respond. I didn't need outside voices. One afternoon, while walking her in the garden, a little girl from across the street ran up with a drawing, a crayon mess of blue sky, yellow sun, and 3 stick figures. She handed it to my mother, said something about being a good grandma. My mother choked on her own spit trying not to cry. I just watched. It didn't move me like it should have. I felt cold. That night, I stared at her sleeping form and wondered if part of me had died back when I was 9 and she told me good kids didn't cry unless they wanted people to hate them. I started recording her too. Short audio clips of her muttering to herself, crying, mumbling half apologies under her breath when she thought I wasn't around. I labeled them, dated them, stored them on a flash drive. I wasn't sure why. Maybe because a part of me thought she'd someday deny it all again. I wanted proof. Meanwhile, I stripped the house of anything that made her feel at home. Family photos removed. The mirror in her room got replaced with a distorted funhouse one for a week before I returned the original. She didn't complain. Maybe she thought she deserved it. Or maybe she just gave up. I installed a bell on her wheelchair, not for emergencies, but because I wanted to hear her coming. The soft jingling made her presence feel small, pathetic. I began to find excuses to be out of the house, but only for short periods, and only after locking away her remote, her books, her access to anything comforting. She noticed. She started asking for longer visits from the therapist, whose name she could barely pronounce. One session, I listened behind the door. The therapist asked about her childhood. She said, "My mother didn't love me either. I guess I never learned how. I didn't know whether to feel pity or rage. I chose neither. I chose silence." That night, I sat on the floor of the kitchen and cried quietly while the dishwasher ran. I thought of the first time I scraped my knee and she told me to stop embarrassing myself. I thought of the way I used to whisper stories to my stuffed animals because no one else listened. And I realized I was still whispering, still hoping someone would hear. In the morning, I gave her a choice: walk again, or die in that chair. But she had to admit what she'd done. She looked at me with watery eyes and said nothing. So I wheeled her to the blank wall again. I let her sit there while the rest of the house buzzed with sound. When I passed her at lunch, she reached out and caught my wrist. Her grip was weak. "I'm trying," she said. I pulled my arm free and said, "So did I." That night, I didn't play the lullaby. The silence was heavier than the music. I lay awake and stared at the ceiling, wondering how much of me had become her and how much was still mine. The answer didn't come. It never does. But I knew one thing: the game wasn't over. Not yet. I had more tapes to make. More entries to log. And somewhere inside me, something was still waiting, not for closure, but for reckoning. Something shifted around the third week, not just in her but in me too, something subtle and sour that made the air heavier in the hallway and turned the sound of the television into a kind of static that grated on my nerves. I woke up that Monday with a strange sense of purpose, not the satisfying kind, but something colder, a mechanical pull that said, "Today you take away more of what she believes is hers." I started with the wardrobe. Silk blouses, old perfume bottles, costume jewelry she hadn't worn in years but kept like they were sacred heirlooms, all of it boxed, labeled, and sold anonymously online. She didn't ask where they went. She knew. I replaced her mirror with a piece of smoky glass that distorted her reflection just enough to make her wince. Her old wedding ring, which she wore on a chain around her neck after her second husband left, vanished one afternoon. She didn't ask. I turned her room into a parody of a teenager's sanctuary, heart-shaped frames with stock photos, pillows that said girl power and glitter, a lamp shaped like a cat. The more childish it became, the more I saw her shoulders slump, like her body was finally absorbing the humiliation her words used to inflict. She began muttering to herself more often, sometimes in sleep, sometimes when she thought I wasn't listening. She was just a child, she whispered once, her voice cracking. I didn't ask who she meant. I didn't need to. I had her diary entries, her tapes, her hospital files, her empty bank account. I had her now. And every item I removed, every memory I dismantled, was a nail in the coffin of the version of herself she clung to. She tried once to assert something. She asked to keep one old photo, a black and white shot of her and her sister as kids. I took it from her hand and slid it into the shredder. She didn't ask again. That same afternoon, a social worker came for a surprise wellness check. I knew they might eventually. I smiled the whole time, sweet and professional. My uniform helped, nurse's scrubs with my badge visible, my speech prepared. I guided her through the house like it was a showroom, exaggerated every small accommodation, handrails, bath seat, labeled drawers for medications, a schedule pinned in bold font. I made a point to leave fresh fruit visible, herbal tea steeping in the kitchen. When she spoke to my mother alone in the living room, I listened from the kitchen, heart pounding, waiting. But my mother didn't say anything that could undo me. She just said, "My daughter has done everything for me," her tone unreadable. After the worker left, I waited for her to accuse me, for the smugness to come back, but she didn't even lift her eyes. That night, I left her door open a crack and sat in the hallway, just out of view. I heard her crying, soft and rhythmic. I didn't move. The neighbors' letters stopped coming. Maybe they gave up. Or maybe they saw what she had become and understood that some wounds don't heal, they calcify, turn into armor. I walked past her the next morning without speaking. She reached for me, fingers trembling, but I turned the corner. Later, I took her to the park again, wheeled her past the kids, the sounds of joy slicing through the silence like something obscene. She kept her head down. I sat beside her and told her how I used to sit at my bedroom window and watch the neighbor girl get picked up from school by her mom, how I used to pretend that one day I'd be waiting at that curb too. "But you never came," I said, not accusingly, just plainly. She didn't speak. Her fingers fidgeted in her lap. When we returned home, I changed all the framed art in the hallway. Where there were once bland floral prints, I put up framed scans of my old report cards, my community college acceptance letter, a printout of my first paycheck. The biggest frame held a photo of me in my graduation gown, alone on the stage, holding my diploma. She passed them all every morning. Her expression didn't change, but I knew she saw them. I made a new playlist of ambient sounds to play at night, recordings of screaming arguments, distorted so the words weren't clear, just the tone. It looped at low volume from the speaker under her bed. She didn't sleep much after that. Her eyes grew darker. Her voice, when she used it, cracked like glass. One evening, as I spooned soft potatoes into her mouth, she asked, "Do you hate me?" It was the first real question she'd asked since I brought her back. I didn't answer. I just wiped her chin and said, mouth open. The power dynamic wasn't enough anymore. I needed to erase her self-concept, rewrite her internal narrative until even her memories betrayed her. I uploaded the audio clips to an encrypted folder, gave it a title, Mother, Unreliable Narrator. I didn't know if I'd ever use them. Maybe I just wanted to prove she'd lost even her story. The therapist visited again and asked how she was sleeping. She said, "I dream of pink rooms and shadows." The therapist looked at me and I smiled, nodded, poured tea. That evening, I went to the attic again and found the old storage bins from when I moved out at 19. I hadn't opened them in years. Inside were my old uniforms, photos from nursing school, a ripped journal. I flipped through it, page after page of scribbled thoughts. Someday I'll be free, I won't be like her, I'll matter. I ripped out the pages one by one and taped them to her bedroom wall. She woke up surrounded by them. She stared in silence, lips moving, reading each one over and over. She didn't ask for them to be removed. That was when I realized she no longer believed she had the right to ask for anything. Her spirit wasn't just bruised. It was splintered. She began stuttering more. At breakfast she asked, what time, and then stopped, as if she didn't deserve to finish. I said, time for you to listen, and played another tape, her voice, from 20 years ago, saying she didn't want to attend a parent-teacher meeting because I was just going to disappoint again. She turned her face away. I angled the speaker closer. I wasn't sure if this was justice anymore. I didn't care. The house became quieter, but heavier. Not peaceful. Tense. Like the quiet before a crash. And still, I kept going. Because there was still more to take, more to expose, more layers to peel back until she was nothing but the same hollow echo she had left in me. And I wasn't done yet. Not even close. Something inside me dulled in those days, like a nerve ending going numb, but I couldn't tell if it was peace or fatigue. The routines went on. Morning pills, scheduled silence, the whisper of the lullaby she once mocked now looping through the air like ghosts. I kept expecting the guilt to show up. I had prepared a space for it, somewhere between her chair by the window and the tape recorder I used to log her mutterings, but it never came. Instead, there was only a kind of clean, sterile stillness, like after a storm flattens a forest, destruction so total that not even regret can grow in it. She asked once, out of nowhere, "Do you remember the red coat?" I didn't answer, but I remembered. It was the coat I begged for when I was 9, the one she said made me look cheap, the one she gave away to a neighbor's daughter right in front of me. I remembered every thread. I remembered the way my voice cracked when I asked why she didn't want me to have something warm. I didn't respond to her question. I simply walked away and added a photo of a little girl in a red coat to the collage of memories I was curating on the fridge. The next day, the neighbor slipped another letter under the door. I hadn't seen one in over a week. This one was shorter than the rest. It said, "Be careful. Justice can turn into rot if you feed it too long." I read it twice, then lit it on the stove. I wondered who they thought they were, a savior? A conscience? Too late for that. I had long since buried my conscience under years of unmet needs and the sound of my own name being used like an insult. But that same day, I saw something I hadn't expected. While wheeling her out to the porch, we passed the TV, and a child's program was playing, bright colors, bad animation, squeaky voices, and for just a second, she smiled. A small, bitter, involuntary curve of the mouth, like some long dormant synapse fired without permission. I stopped moving. "What was that?" I asked. She looked away. I didn't press. But that smile haunted me more than her tears ever did. That night, I sat in my room and pulled out an old notebook, one I hadn't written in since college. I wrote down one sentence, "What if she's not pretending?" I didn't like what it implied. Empathy was a slippery slope, and I'd come too far down a harder path. Still, I started noticing things. She was quieter now, but not out of defiance, it felt more like resignation. She stopped pushing back when I read from her diary. She started asking to listen to my music, even the trashy drama theme song she used to scoff at. She once said, softly, "I used to dance to that song. Before you." It should have made me angry, and maybe it did, but the rage didn't rise the way it used to. It sat low, tired. One night, I found her staring at the park across the street again, not at the kids, but at the empty swing. When I asked what she was looking at, she said, "I don't know. Something I missed." I went to bed with a heavy chest. The next morning, I caught myself humming while making her breakfast, the same lullaby I used to hum as a child to soothe myself. I stopped the second I realized it. I dropped the spoon in the sink too hard, made her flinch. "Don't get used to it," I muttered. But my voice lacked venom. Something was shifting and I hated it. Not because I didn't want change, but because change meant I had to acknowledge that this version of her, this crumpled, hollow woman, was still human. And I wasn't ready to give her that. Not yet. Still, I noticed she started using my name more. Not sarcastically, not with emphasis, but plainly. "Gabriel, could you pass the water? Gabriel, I need the bathroom." Hearing her say it without malice twisted something in me. I tried to balance it out by tightening control, shorter visits from the therapist, more exposure to the tapes, louder ambient noise at night. But her compliance made even that feel performative. She no longer resisted. She accepted. That was worse. It was like punishing a ghost. The more passive she became, the more I felt something gnawing at the back of my mind, a question I didn't want to face. Was I still punishing her, or just trying to punish the version of her burned into my memory? Late one evening, I opened the drawer where I kept her documents, the power of attorney, the financial papers, the medical records, and I stared at the pages. Her name, once so terrifying, so absolute, looked small now. Insignificant. A woman with 2 failed marriages, no savings, no friends, reduced to the mercy of the child she tried to erase. And somehow, it didn't feel like victory anymore. It felt like excavation. Like I dug so deep into our shared ruin that I wasn't sure which bones were hers and which were mine. I needed air. I left the house, walked to the edge of the park, and sat on the cold bench alone. I watched the swing creak in the wind, the empty seat tracing slow arcs under the streetlight. My phone buzzed. A text from the neighbor. "You look like you're trying to forget something you can't forgive." I didn't respond. I couldn't. I went home, past her bedroom, saw her asleep with the glow of the projector washing the ceiling in slow waves of pink and blue. For a second, she looked peaceful. Like someone else. Like someone I might have pitied once. I stood there for too long. I didn't go in. The next day, I threw away the old Bluetooth speaker. No more nighttime distortions. I told myself it was to conserve electricity. But the truth was, I'd started hearing my own voice in those sounds, my childhood sobs echoing back through her pain. I replaced her rough blanket with a neutral one. Nothing soft, nothing harsh. Just a standard hospital-issue quilt. She didn't comment. She just pulled it up to her chin like a child trying to feel safe. The therapist visited again. This time, I sat in the session too. We talked about silence. About inheritance. About how some traumas are passed down like heirlooms, not because we want to keep them, but because we never learn how to drop them. The therapist asked me if I thought I'd ever be a mother. I laughed without meaning to. "No," I said. "I'd rather end the story here." My mother looked at me. Her eyes were glassy. She didn't speak. That night, I cried again, not in rage but confusion. I didn't know what I wanted anymore. Revenge had been my compass for so long, I didn't know how to navigate without it. The next morning, I set her breakfast down without a comment. She looked at the tray, then at me, and said, "Thank you." Just that. No hesitation, no prompting. For the first time, I didn't correct her. I just sat across from her and said, "You were welcome." And in the silence that followed, something cracked, not broken, not destroyed, but maybe, finally, beginning to shift. The silence between us became something different after that morning. Not a wall, not a weapon, but a kind of fog, dense and slow, making it hard to see what was ahead but impossible to ignore what had passed. I still followed the schedule, still documented everything, meals, medications, expressions, but something in the way I moved around the house had changed, like I was walking through a version of myself I no longer entirely believed in. I told myself I was just tired, that the months of caretaking had eroded my edges, but it was more than that. The monster I had molded her into in my mind was beginning to bleed at the borders, not into innocence, but into complexity, and complexity is harder to hate. Then came the incident. It was early, barely light, and I found her slumped in the chair by the window, her face slack in a way I'd never seen before. For a second, I thought she was pretending, staging some kind of drama to get sympathy, but then I saw her hand twitch violently and the color drain from her lips. I called the ambulance. My hands moved without thought, checking her pulse, elevating her legs, clearing her airway. It was all training, muscle memory. None of it felt real until I was sitting in the ER, blood on my sleeve, her belongings in a plastic bag beside me, and the doctor asked, "If her heart stops, do we resuscitate?" I didn't answer right away. My mouth opened, but the words didn't come. I saw the version of her that told me I was a mistake, the one who left me alone when I needed an inhaler, the one who stole every birthday and called it discipline. And I saw the version who had said thank you, who had stared at the park like she could almost see something she missed. "Yes," I finally said. "If it stops, bring her back." She lived. Barely. The heart attack had compounded her condition, and recovery would be slow. The doctor spoke in terms like diminished capacity and ongoing rehabilitation. I listened, nodded, signed forms. And then I made sure she was told, clearly, unmistakably, that she was alive because I said so. When she woke up and I was sitting beside her, she didn't ask why I was there. She just looked at me and said, in a voice rough from intubation, "I thought I was done." I leaned in close and whispered, "You don't get to choose." The days that followed were a blur of medications, follow-ups, adjusted routines. But something shifted inside the house. Not the decor, the pastel nightmare of her bedroom remained untouched, but in the way she looked at me. Not with fear. Not even with submission. With something heavier, recognition. Like she finally saw me not as an extension of her past, not as a burden or an accident or a ghost of a different life, but as a person. I didn't return the gaze. Not fully. But I didn't avoid it either. She began to speak more. Not full conversations, not confessions, but fragments. "I used to play piano," she said one day. "I stopped when my mother told me it wasn't ladylike." Another day, "He hit me once." Your father. I never told anyone. Thought I deserved it. These scraps of memory weren't offered like apologies, more like confessions spoken into a vacuum. I recorded them too. I couldn't help it. Part of me still needed to own her story the way she had tried to own mine. But another part, deeper and quieter, started wondering if I was trying to understand her. And I didn't like that part. I tried to drown it. I played the old videos again during breakfast, the ones of empty birthday parties and silent rooms. She didn't cry. She didn't flinch. She just watched. And one morning, after I played the clip of me sitting alone with a cupcake, she said, I remember that day. I was in the bedroom. I was crying. I thought if I didn't come out, it would teach you not to expect things. I didn't say anything. I just took the tray away. But that night, I lay awake thinking about how strange it is, the lessons we think we're teaching, and the ones we actually give. A week later, she asked me to bring in a priest. I said no. She asked again. I told her the only visitor I'd allow was a therapist. You need to talk to someone who doesn't promise salvation, I said. You need someone who helps you sit with what you've done, not wipe it away. She didn't argue. The therapist came. And for the first time, I let her speak uninterrupted. She talked about how motherhood felt like a sentence. How the miscarriage had shattered her. How when I was born, she looked into my face and felt nothing. How shame followed her like a shadow, not because of what she had done, but because of what she hadn't felt. I thought the love would come, she said. It didn't. And I hated myself for that. And then I hated you. It was the most honest thing she had ever said. And it broke me in a way I didn't know I could still be broken. Not because it excused anything, it didn't, but because it made sense. Horribly, perfectly, humanly sense. After the session, I sat in the kitchen and stared at my own reflection in the dark window. I looked older. Not in years, but in something else, a kind of emotional erosion that no amount of rest could undo. I walked to her room and stood in the doorway. She looked up from the bed, eyes open, alert. Do you feel better now? I asked. She shook her head. No. But I feel clearer. I nodded. Then I turned and left the door open. It was a small gesture. But it felt massive. The next day, I didn't play the graduation speech. I made eggs the way she liked them when I was little, scrambled hard, no salt. I didn't sit with her while she ate. I went outside and stood on the porch and let the morning settle on my skin. The neighbor was watering their plants. They waved. I waved back. Nothing felt resolved. Nothing felt healed. But something had changed. Not because she said sorry, a single sorry can't fix decades. But because I'd finally heard enough of her truth to stop needing to fill the silence with mine. That afternoon, she asked for her mirror back. Not the funhouse one, not the work class, the real one. I want to see what I am, she said. I brought it to her. Set it up carefully. And I watched as she looked into her own eyes and didn't turn away. It happened in the quietest way imaginable, as if the house itself had decided not to wake me. There was no sound, no sudden gasp, no cry for help, just stillness, thick and unmoving, and a hallway that felt heavier than usual when I walked it that morning. Her door was slightly ajar, the way I had left it the night before, and the mirror she had requested stood up right across from her bed, catching the first light of morning and reflecting it against the ceiling in a pale halo. I stood there for a few seconds before I stepped in. She was still. Her eyes were half-lidded, her mouth slightly open, her fingers curled loosely around the edge of the blanket. I moved closer, placed 2 fingers at her wrist. Nothing. I waited, not sure for what, maybe the denial to kick in, maybe the fury. But what came instead was something quieter. Not sadness. Not relief. Just acknowledgement. I pulled the sheet up over her face. The act felt both ceremonial and clinical, something I had done a dozen times in hospice care, and yet this time it felt like I was laying something more than just a body to rest. It was a version of her, the one I had feared, the one I had punished, the one I had finally seen crumble. I sat beside her for a while, long after I had called the necessary numbers. The paramedics came and went. The official cause of death was listed as cardiac arrest in her sleep. No struggle. No final words. The neighbor came by, quiet and awkward, and offered to help with arrangements. I thanked them without warmth. There was a funeral, if you could call it that. Just me, the neighbor, and the priest she had once asked for and I had denied, now standing at the foot of a rented casket, reciting prayers I didn't listen to. I didn't speak during the ceremony. I didn't cry. I stood, watched the lowering, and walked away before the final shovelful of dirt fell. I didn't feel empty. I didn't feel full. I just felt finished. Back at the house, I went to her room and started dismantling it. The pink blankets, the glitter pillows, the unicorn sheets, all folded, bagged, given away. The glow lamp unplugged, the mirror covered with a cloth. I sat down at her desk, the one she never used, and pulled out the folder of printed logs I had kept, every hour, every action, every note. I leafed through them, page by page, until I reached the last one. I signed it. Final entry. No further care required. I left it on the nightstand. In the kitchen, I retrieved the tapes, the diary, the old letters from the neighbor, and took them into the backyard. I lit a small fire in the rusted metal barrel she used to burn leaves in every fall. One by one, I fed everything into the flames. Her voice, her memories, her paper trail. Gone. Not erased, nothing that happened could be undone, but freed. Set adrift. Ashes. Inside, the silence felt different. Not hostile. Not echoing. Just quiet. I walked through the room slowly, barefoot, as if I were seeing the house for the first time. My old report card still hung on the walls. My nursing license still sat beside her bed. But now, they looked less like trophies and more like proof of passage, that I had survived. That I had built something out of nothing. I sat on the couch and turned on the television. A documentary was playing, some BBC special on nurses in emergency units. I watched for a while, listening to the narrator talk about compassion, resilience, and the quiet strength required to care for others. I thought of all the patients I'd held the hands of while they died. I thought of the time I stayed with a woman through her final hours because her daughter couldn't bear to be there. I thought of how many strangers I had given more kindness than I had ever received growing up. I reached for the remote and turned the volume up. For the first time in a long while, I let myself sink into the cushions without bracing for something. There was no guilt. No triumph. No lingering bitterness. Just stillness. Later that night, I walked to my bedroom and past the hallway mirror. I caught a glimpse of myself, paused, and looked fully. I didn't flinch. I looked older. Worn, yes, but intact. Whole, in a way I didn't recognize. I whispered my own name, not because I needed to hear it, but because I wanted to. Gabriel. It didn't hurt to say anymore. I sat down at my desk and opened a fresh notebook. The first page stayed blank for a few minutes. Then, I wrote a single sentence: I'm not what was done to me. I didn't need to write more. I closed the book, placed it on the shelf, and turned off the light. That night, the house slept with me. No crying. No echoes. No lullabies. Just the quiet hum of something new, not peace, but possibility. And for the first time, I didn't dream of her.